the magic of the internet means we are live. I mean, look at this. Look at how badly I framed this. You can't see Professor Tony Collins. The more you're in shot and the less I'm in, the better. No, it's better because no one is here.
You need a fisheye angle.
I mean, when I say no one's here to listen to me, I mean no one's here. There's literally an audience here. I mean, I don't want to go for the low-hanging fruit. We've got a Huddersfield Giants fan in the front row, and this must be what it's like playing at the McAlpine Stadium.
There's two of us.
It's called the Gal Farm these days, anyway. Welcome. We are in Catterick, the home of Catterick Garrison. I was very excited because Phil's not happy because he hasn't seen a tank, have you?
Not one.
Not a single
Wanted to
tank.
be caught behind one and use it as an excuse.
And we are
Is that
late.
what you're on?
I mean, if we were on bait, we'd be straight out, wouldn't we? Because we're late.
Well, we're not. We're fashionably...
The framing of this is, for the people who are listening later on, it doesn't matter what's happening, but we are live in Catterick as part of the Rugby League World Cup 2021 Cultural Festival.
Us and culture in the same sentence.
I thought it was just cheese, but no. We're here to talk about Rugby League for the first half of the programme, about the World Cup for the second half, because we're only less than a week away. No, just over a week away. Phil Kaplan is here. Last time, it took him 20 minutes for me to ask him a question, so that was good. Bizarrely, the Speaker of the House of Commons has retweeted the fact that we're on the way. I mean, it's a bit late now, Sir Lindsay. You know, everyone's here. We've got a seat for you if you want to. Also here. Now, I've asked the question, Phil, and the answer's no. Not related to former Wigan and Australia player. Tamzin Renouf is here. Tamzin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Stevie Ward is also here. Former Leeds Rhinos captain, England international.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm sort of England international. I never actually played. I just got injured in that.
You not play for the Knights or England A or
No, I just sat on the sidelines mainly for that.
Still better than everybody else.
I'm a squaddy, that makes sense.
Squaddy in Catterick, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, tracksuit. I've got a lot of kit.
Well, you're also wearing camouflage under your jacket as well.
I blend in, you know. So whatever environment I must go in, I will wear an England tracksuit, even if I'm not playing. And I will wear camo in Catterick.
Could be a club media manager like that.
Well, yeah, maybe.
So speak from experience, maybe. Professor Tony Collins is also here. He knows everything.
Not quite. I didn't know the way to Catterick, for example.
That did the Satanovich turned itself off, which was...
Well, it put itself in the middle of the field for some strange reason.
But we have made it, and we are here to talk some rugby league. I'm going to start with Tamzin because you're playing. You just finished the season with York. Another League Leaders' Shield, because obviously you picked up one at Castleford as well. How would now coming off the grand final, everyone's saying, well, we've achieved beyond our expectations this year at York. How's it been for you playing and not playing this year?
Yeah, it's been good at York. It's a lot different to what it was like at Cass. Like the environment's loads different. It's like just a better. I think this year mainly we've all just enjoyed playing again. Like not that at Cass none of us did enjoy playing, but it's just like been a lot more enjoyable this year, which has been really good. And I think that's like some of our successes come off the back of just like all of us enjoying ourselves.
I thought Women's Rugby League had a great couple of seasons, then COVID hit and everything was a bit of a mess. Do you feel everything's back, kind of back where we were?
Yeah, hopefully the World Cup will boost that as well, like the women. I think definitely with it being a lot of the venues being similar, it'll help push the women's game a lot more as well.
You're not just with the League Leaders' Shield, but also the Young Player of the Year and the Woman of Steel. Not a bad year for individual. Someone saying you should have had the Coach of the Year as well. Some people on the internet said that, not me, but...
I agree.
Isn't it? but it's been
obviously it wasn't great to end on the grand final loss, but then to have Holly and Tara win the awards just after that probably like boosted the season a bit more, which was a good end.
Are you sick of playing Leeds in finals? Because I know I'm sick of seeing it.
Always a good game though.
Which it wasn't. It was a good game to watch at St Helens, but obviously, unfortunately for York, not the right result. A man who's played in grand finals and won them is Stevie Ward, and you didn't because we met in the car on the way, and you didn't remember this, but in 20 years of broadcasting, the one interview that still stands out to me is with you after the grand final in 2017 at Old Trafford, and usually.
Wow.
It's a big call, that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is, because usually when you interview players after the games, they're either exuberant and jumping up and down and high on adrenaline, or they, well, I tend to avoid ones I've lost, because what do you ask people who've lost?
Yeah.
Where did it go wrong? Why are you rubbish? Why have you not got the trophy? But you just won the grand final, but we were sat crouched down in the pokey room at Old Trafford, because you probably shouldn't have been playing in that game.
No, I actually did an interview for it the other day, and it's coming up to 5 years, some sort of date. I don't work in calendars and stuff, but it's in and around 5 years right now of the grand final. I was knackered. I was absolutely knackered. The guy, Ross Eptonstall, who did the interview, sent me a picture of me, and I know he's saying you don't want to interview players that are losing, but I look like I'd lost. my eyes are half closed, and I'm looking like just out of it. But I remember that it was a task to get through those interviews after, because I was just so spent after the full week of just getting on that train to play, and sort of kidding people that I wasn't playing, and back in my mind I knew I was going to play, which is the most exciting thing about it. The day before, and then my name getting put on the team sheet, and people still going, what? Who is this Lazarus type figure, and that was the fun thing about it. And then I got to the changing rooms, and I went, oh, this is real now. Yeah, this is real. Oh dear. And got the nerves that you could imagine, but got through the game, and yeah, it was one of the best weeks of my life, just mainly because it was different. It was different, and I had my own little narrative going into it, I think.
Now, speaking of narratives, unfortunately, you weren't able to write your own in terms of when you called time on your career. It was forced on you.
I'd like to revisit that, but...
it's all right. Leeds will play New Zealand or Australia in 2
or
3 years' time, and
yeah,
Gary will ring you.
I've still got
Come
time.
and do a cameo appearance.
Yeah, I've still got time. I'm 28 now, so I could have another 5 years, couldn't I, if I choose to throw myself back out there. But yeah, wouldn't be the right thing to do. But no, it's a shame, innit? It's a shame, really. But there's things. Obviously, I would have loved to play for England, and I'd love to be in that back row this year. And I would have liked myself to be in it. But ups and downs, and everyone has it. It's not just me on a rugby field with getting to go out there and playing the theatre of dreams. Everyone has the ups and downs, and I think adversity is when you come off script, really. When you're trying to, the script went for me that way in 2017, but then real adversity is when that script is to be the captain, to go and win trophies for Rob Burrow, to go and carry on. But coming off that script is adversity, I feel. So yeah, but here I am, and I'm doing something different. I'm enjoying it.
Good. I mean, I think the only person who hasn't got a podcast on this panel is you, Tamzin. You're not got a podcast.
You need to get one.
Everyone's got a podcast. Yeah. Everyone. I mean, Phil, you've got a podcast. You're on this one. When Tony comes, we can say he's part of it.
Only when you invite me, yeah.
Professor Tony Collins has a podcast and lots of books. There might be some in this library. And it's proof that you should do research rather than look on Wikipedia where it says Stevie will play for England, and obviously so that's me in the bin. The big...
I don't mind that being around, you know what I mean? It makes you sound better, doesn't it? I don't mind that being around.
No, but,
you'll be ringing up Leeds again going, I did play for England. That clause.
Yeah.
Trigger it.
I know, show Gary that. But, I wonder if 10 episodes in the squads, across the years, does that count?
Yeah.
Does it count?
You must have a lot of good swag.
Well,
if nothing else.
Of course, I've got some kit, and I've given it to a lot of people, and I'm sure they've enjoyed it, so it's good, isn't it? It's all good.
Whenever anyone says that, it reminds me of Sam Burgess's shorts. We don't want to talk about that. No. I mean, the World Cup's coming up, and that's going to be the anniversary of that game between England and France, and him giving away shorts to someone in the crowd. It was different times.
Couldn't do that now, could you?
You'd hope not, but I still reckon people would ask them. Are they trying to clone Sam Burgess? I don't know. It's concerning. Professor Tony Collins, we are at yet another crossroad in the history of rugby league. The IMG reports was out last week, the outline, where we're going to go next. We've seen this all before, haven't we?
It's deja vu all over again, isn't it? It's every so often rugby league goes through the same crisis. It has the same existential crisis. What are we doing? Where are we going wrong? How do we get bigger? How do we change? What do we need to do? and it looks for simple one-step solutions, I think. Hopefully, this the IMG report seems to be slightly different in that it's not trying to. It's not focusing on how many teams should get relegated, or should we do this with the rules or that with the rules. And I think there's some elements of positivity in it. And it's interesting that today in the Guardian, Jonathan Lowe, probably one of the best sports writers in Britain, has had his 2 pennies worth. So I think the fact that someone like that is, I don't necessarily agree with him, but the fact that someone like that's coming up with some. With his opinions on the future of the game is all to the good, because at least it means we've got some kind of dialogue going on beyond the game, and I think that's what's important. I think for too long we've been very insular, we've been very inward looking, and it's taken its toll, and that was obviously made worse through COVID. But there's a lot of good things going on. The women's game is tremendously successful compared to what it was. If we'd been here 10 years ago. Talking about it, there's been very little going on, and the World Cup seems to, if it works out, it could be a real turning point for the game.
I think that's the thing with the IMG report, that it's come at the right time, because there is something you can now build off the back of. The other thing that struck me, having seen the presentation rather than the press release that came out about it, the press release, probably understandably, because they needed to get something out there quickly. They'd briefed the clubs, and then they were going to say the findings to the public, and you don't get a huge window just to get something out there. And that didn't have the detail in that the presentation does, which you will be able to read in the next issue of... I don't know, it's gone too early again. But yeah, I think you need to read the detail, and the thing that struck me listening to Matt Dwyer, who outlined IMG's proposals, was that they're in it for 12 years. So they're not looking for a quick fix. It's not like we're going to change to the 8s and it's going to solve all our problems and tomorrow we will be a major sport. It's like, we think that what people are watching is okay, we think it can be sold better, we think that we have to play to the realism of what we are rather than what we think we are or what we might like to be. So if promotion relegation at where we stand at the moment doesn't work for Rugby League, then there's nothing wrong with not having it, providing you're replacing it with something that is credible. And again, you're here as the historian on the panel. There's been a huge tranche of time when the game's been played that we haven't had promotion relegation. When we had one division of up to 35 clubs, it was the fixtures, it was the amount of games that you had. It wasn't that somebody had to go up and somebody had to go down. We have got two halves of the same sport. We've got a full-time half and a part-time half. And their proposals seem to be the best way of bridging that. And as you say, it's not about saying this club needs to be there. It's about, here are some criteria. This is what you need to be if you're going to play at the top table. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. To me, that strikes a level of responsibility. And the two articles that have been written saying ditching and promotion relegation is not a good thing have been written by football writers. But we're not football. And I think that's important, that we realise what we are rather than what we think we might be.
Yeah, and I think that's been... Rugby League has never dealt well with promotion and relegation because we've taken the model from football. And football is obviously much, much bigger, much, much richer and much stronger all round.
And got more participants.
Yeah, that's right. It's a completely different game. But to compare, for any sport, and this is one of the reasons why rugby unions have a lot of financial problems, because they, as typical rugby union, their hubris, their arrogance is so much that they thought, well, we're going to compete with soccer in 10 years, so we'll just keep spending and spending. And nobody's going to compete with soccer. It's just too deeply embedded and too rich to be able to compete with, or to use as a model. And I think, as you said, for most of its history, Rugby League didn't deal with it because it had one division of, as you said, up to 35 clubs. And we've only really had promotion and relegation last, 40 years or so. And I think one of the things that the IMG proposals do, which is very, very important, is that it says that to be a successful club, it's not a zero-sum game. To be a successful club does not mean that another club has to be unsuccessful, which is what promotion and relegation means. And I think the idea that we can have Super League, Top Division, call it whatever it's going to be called.
That's the other thing. It won't be called Super League.
Yeah. So whatever it's going to be called. So you can rise to that level, but it doesn't mean to say someone else has to suffer because you've risen to that level. And I think that's the important thing, because one of the things about Rugby League is that it's very proud of its tradition that everybody gets an equal chance.
Well,
and that goes back to black players in the 30s. And this gives clubs a way to fulfil their dreams. You can start a club, and in theory, maybe not in practice, but in theory, you can go all the way to the top, given long enough and expertise and good players and all the rest of it. And that doesn't stop that happening. What it does say is that just because you've got a really successful club and you've built and you've got great grassroots, you've got great player development, you've got great team on the pitch, that because you've done that, it doesn't mean to say that another club who may well have done the same thing, maybe not quite as good as you, that other club has to suffer. You can all benefit. And I think that's the kernel of the really important thing about this report.
I also think that the one thing we haven't got while we talk about it is we haven't got those criteria yet. They'll be out at the end of the year, but I'm hoping that it includes, you have to have a women's team, you have to have a wheelchair team, you have to have LDRL, you have to have PDRL, you have to have a strong foundation, you have to have a presence in the community, you have to have a certain number of people in what the Aussies would call the front office. And I think the important thing for the women's game is that it doesn't follow the men's model. Yeah. You don't have to. But any club that wants to be taken seriously has to have this overarching responsibility. And that's not criticising Castleford when you were there or saying York are doing it better, but you can see, or you can tell us probably better than I can, that some clubs have embraced it more than others. And if everybody does, that's where the game grows and expands.
Yeah, 100%. The club at York is so much more embracing of the women's team, and we are included in under York. We're not just the women's team that has to be there, because at some point they were probably going to need a women's team. They actually look at us as part of I would say a family, and that's the difference probably.
I'm concerned now because since 1996, Sky have had their own records of here are the most number of tries in the Super League. So if we're going to change the name of the Super League, we're going to have to start the records again.
Well, I think
they've just got a new trophy for the women, with the S on and everything. It's lovely.
Well, but they can still have the trophy. But one of the things
that the S is something different.
The IMG representatives clearly made clear when they were outlining the proposals was we're in phase one. Phase one is looking at the game, if you like, and as a game, there isn't a lot wrong with it. It needs to be tinkered with to make sure it's the best it can be. They want to accentuate internationals. They identified 3 areas of growth, one of which was the women's game. France was another. So although there are stipulations on the number of French teams, and they will be asked to have a minimum quota of domestic players to enhance the international game, so it actually makes sense. And London, they haven't said how London they're going to do it, but they did say it will be different to anything that's been done before. That's all, phase one. Phase two is then appealing to a new market while not losing your existing market. So they're talking about a new product, which you would think at this stage might be a shorter form that appeals to a younger audience. And then out of that, they're then saying, once those foundations are in there, we rebrand the sport. And that rebranding, I think, will be the Super League's 10 a penny now, isn't it? Yeah, every sport has a Super League. How do we make ourselves different? And to me, that there's a logic to that. And if you just want to focus on the promotion relegation bit, you miss all the other stuff.
Yeah. We pontificate on this programme.
I think I just did.
About plenty of issues. And for the last few, because we jumped on the women's bandwagon in 2018. I mean, you were on it before, Phil, but I jumped on it in 2018 because I spotted an opportunity to get myself on the telly, which I did. It was great. The one time I've been on the telly, I mean, it's not really on the telly, it was on BBC Online, but it still counts on the TV. And we come up with many and various theories about what we would do with the women's game, but it doesn't matter what we think. Tamzin, you play the game. What do you want IMG to say? This is how the women's game should look going forward. No, big question. Simple question for you. Just throw it out there. Right? Go.
Well, you need to be paid first of all.
Yeah, women as a whole, people still watch the game and say they're not as good as men, but we don't train Monday to Friday, 9 while whatever the men do. We have full-time jobs. We go to training on a night and we play on weekends after we've had a full week at work and training. So I think before, obviously, being paid is the next step, I think. And I don't think you can really look at anything else until you get that, because I can't imagine having anything else until doing rugby was full-time, because how am I meant to focus on that when I'm thinking about uni? I've got this to do, I've got that to do, and there's rugby to do.
So where does the money come from?
I think that's the low-hanging fruit that IMG can see, and why they've identified the women's game as one of their growth areas.
Because we do appear to have a problem with finding a sponsor for the national team on the back of the shirt or whatever.
I'm not sure they will, and I think on the back of a World Cup. I mean, for me, that clearly the men's game will be the one that's mainly on BBC One. It'll be the major focus. But actually, I think the biggest successes are going to be in the women's, and particularly the wheelchair game. And I think off the back of that, IMG will be able to pick up sponsorship. And I think as long as it's realised that doesn't just go to a parent club and become part of their income, but it's ring fenced and goes into the women's game to initially perhaps pay expenses rather than make you full time. I think the other thing, without pontificating more than is necessary, is it's how you look at the league structure and don't follow the men's. So again, I think wheelchair have been pretty innovative. We've said it a few times about London Roosters this year. They took an amalgam of the best players in the south of England to produce a team that got to the semi-finals of the Super League. That's not following any other model. That nobody called it a merger and went, shock horror. They just went, we haven't really got enough players in that region, but we've got some who are really talented. If we put them all together, we could have a competitive side. Well, in the women's game, you've got the Premier League South. Now, it may be that not even one of those teams yet is at your level, but it might be that somebody might say, well, what if we called it a Southern Regional Select? The 17 women that we could get playing in that team would give York a really good competitive game. So I think that they'll look at all that, and that brings in sponsorship, because you do get your nationwide appeal then. And it will be the same with wheelchair, because I don't think we're allowed to say yet what wheelchair might be next year, but there is some expansion, and that expansion will bring in further sponsorship, absolutely 100%.
And if you've never had a go in a wheelchair playing rugby league, have a go, because I have, and I was rubbish at it, but it was great fun. It gives you a great insight into the level of skill and ability which we will see in the World Cup coming up later on this autumn. We'll talk more about the women's game in a moment. We're on this IMG subject. Stevie, you come across as a non-typical rugby league player. I'm going to take the...
What does that mean?
He is from Morley, to be fair.
I'm going to take... Well, Morley compared to Wakefield, it's posh, it's Leeds, isn't it? I'm going to take the opinion. I am the owner of the team in this sporting life. I think you're all big dumb apes on the field, and you don't think for yourself. You just run for the ball, whatever. But in the changing rooms, when we've had the Super 8s, we've got this at the moment, the IMG thing. Did you ever discuss the future of the game, or do you just fully concentrate on what you're actually doing on the field? Are you actually bothered about what goes on?
It's a really good question, that.
Occasionally I come up with them.
No, I think occasionally you do think of it, and I think when you get lost in the competition, you just obviously do what's ahead of you. But I think with the Super 8s or with the loop fixtures, you're playing these games, and I mean, it's an hard game. Sometimes you're playing twice, sometimes you're playing 3 times a week, especially when you're thinking about loop fixtures, and you just have an energy of the room and the change rooms, and you're like, that's a long exhale for anyone listening. And that's because on one hand you're exhausted, but then on the other hand it's like, what's the significance of this game here? As a player, you're questioning the significance. I remember in 2018, I think we played Wigan for the 4th time, and you're like, this game should be like, you should be at your limit as a player, and you shouldn't be able to hear each other. I think it's when we had a stand at Leeds. We had a stand getting redone, and you could hear players, and obviously the stand being taken away, you could hear more stuff going on, but just the energy and the amount that was getting put into that game was just below standard, and you could feel it on the field. And it wasn't because you consciously thought, I don't want to put as much effort in. It's because it was just the level that we're churning out when you play Wigan 4 times and you know that you're going to be playing in a semi-final or the final, you know, it's like, so there's that element which I guess is a byproduct of what you're doing, but then also I think with talking about the middle eights and stuff like that, you just confused a little bit for what the relevance of it is, and the amount of games sort of takes that away. So I'd be interested to know what in terms of game time and game volume. I'm not going to go on about welfare and concussion and all that sort of stuff, but I'd love to know what IMG think about that, because there's something about loop fixtures, isn't there? In terms
they did mention player welfare, which is the first time in a major presentation that somebody has said that is something that we are looking at, and that is why the 2023 season is set. Season tickets are already on sale. It's going to replicate what we've just had. It will have loop fixtures.
Yeah.
But from 2024 onwards, loop fixtures, which includes Magic Weekend, as that is a loop fixture, are gone.
And that new product will come in as a...
Yeah, and they are talking about that partly because they want to have a narrative flow through the season. So the Challenge Cup goes back to May. An international weekend which will all be against France, men's, women's and wheelchair, all on the same weekend. A new product and a grand final. But they don't want that to not have a scarcity value. So that's why teams will only play each other home and away. I think they're going to build something into the 6th round of the Challenge Cup whereby it could be 2-legged, which guarantees every Super League club another home fixture. So you're taking a bit of income away, but you've got to give them a tiny bit back. Whether that will work or not will be dependent on the results in the first leg, to be honest.
2-legged.
But overall, one of the reasons they want to reduce the number of fixtures is partly because, and it was a phrase that Matt Dwyer used, we want the best players on the field more often than not. And you don't get that with loop fixtures.
It's good to hear, isn't it? It's really good to hear. You talk about the other side, the flip side of looking at relegation, the playoffs, which has been interesting for me to see the flow of that this year, because I've had a distanced sort of relationship with Rugby League, being away and sort of taking time out. But Leeds for the first third of the year was terrible, and then they managed to get 5th, which is an echo of what we did in 2011 and 2012, and then get to the grand final and not win it. But I see it differently now. I'm like, when did that happen? Do you know how did that happen, and how does that? So that goes into the sort of how interesting it is to go into a playoff series. I think it does. There's question for, are they the best team? Do they deserve it? That's up for debate. But the playoffs do bring that sense of unpredictability to it. Like if you've got Leeds going in at 5th and they're playing, Wigan in the semi-final who should beat them. There's a little part of you that's going, well, I think Leeds could actually do it here because it's a playoff game, it's a semi-final. And so it's, I guess, when you talk about the realism of what we are, I don't know how much that plays into the history of Rugby League or what we're used to. But that's intrigue, I guess, that could be put out there more, as a bit of a feature instead of it being, they deserve it or whatever. It's always been something that I've grown up with and seen as, that real sort of result of attrition or people coming together and literally giving it all in those last few games.
Well, I mean, Phil, you lived the grand final as a spectacle, and as we said before, promotion and relegation hasn't been a complete thing in the history of Rugby League, and neither has been first past the post. In fact, very rarely has first past the post been used to decide who are the best team, who are the champion side, so to speak, I should say. Yeah,
because fixture lists were always uneven. If you have loop fixtures in a Magic Weekend, everybody isn't playing everybody else, so a playoff system is the fairest way of then deciding. And we've likened it before to a Grand Prix. That your regular season rounds determine where you are on the grid. If you're too far behind, you ain't going to win the Grand Prix. You need to be somewhere near the front. But once the signal goes for the playoffs to start, you've got a chance. And this year was really interesting because clearly Leeds did fantastically well to win away in Catalan and backed that up to win in Wigan, where they hadn't been beaten at home throughout the entire season. But that week off this year certainly was a benefit because it was such a tough season, and the team that finished top rightly won the title. The side that they played gave it their all, but they just didn't have quite enough. I don't know whether Tamzin thinks that you prefer a first past the post system because York would have won, or actually that test in the grand final sets you up for next year, because you now know that it's not just about what you do week in, week out. You have to then still peak on the final game of the season, which I think as a sporting narrative is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think having the grand final is obviously a great, like the playoffs section is great, but I think especially in rugby league, I don't think, and maybe just because of this year, but I don't think even in the men's game, obviously St Helens backed up their win of the league leaders to then win the grand final, but I don't think the league leaders is actually made as much of a fuss as what it is in, say, football, or like the people who win the league are the team who have been the best most consistently all year, and I think then a team can go and win a grand final off the back of 3 games, and they're then the winners of that season. And I think, not that it's a bad thing, but it's something to think about, especially when...
Does the dropping of the loop fixtures, where it's just home and away and maybe the two-legged, does that make a case for the first past the post a bit more like it would in the Premiership? Or?
I just think there's more drama at the end of the season, and it's a test as well, because I'm telling people that have played the game, it's not really just how you manage each week. You've got to be better than each week when it comes to the final part of the season, and that actually I think is a test of a champion team, because you almost have to finish as near to the top of the league as you can to give you the best chance of winning, and then you've got to win a cup competition against only the best teams in the league. If you manage to do all of that, you are something special. You deserve to be champions, in my opinion. I think that's why Rugby Union have followed it. I think we talk about other sports that don't have promotion. It's very easy to say we should compare ourselves to football because they have promotion relegation, but the NRL don't and the NFL don't. 2 of the biggest sports in their respective worlds, and their playoffs are absolutely fantastic. And the team with the best winning record doesn't often or always win the cup, but those playoff games you don't want to miss. Australia, the NRL series this year, most of those finals games were sellouts. Well, isn't that what we want to get to?
And I think that's the thing because we live in England where football is absolutely completely dominant. We assume that what football does is the natural way that all sports should be, but football's evolved because of its own pressures and its own internal arguments and needs and requirements. Whereas we've until I'm trying to think until 1975, 74, 75. By and large, we were just one division in rugby league, and that meant there was always playoffs. So you had the championship final was the equivalent of the grand final, and that took place at the end of the season. So it was the climax of the season. So you had the traditional season was, you have cup final at the end, and then you'd also a couple of weeks later you'd have the championship final, and that was kind of just the rhythm of the season. Now I think you can argue today that you obviously don't want a cup final next to the grand final because you'd just be exhausted playing 2 finals in 2 weeks. But I do think that it's one of the things that's enabled the grand final to become so popular so quickly. Because I know, if you go back longer before the grand final was introduced, there was a lot of doubt about whether people would turn up for the grand final because surely the team that finishes top is a champion. But it introduces such a level of drama that has already been there in the game historically. It reintroduced that level of drama that brought, as Phil said, brought the season to the climax where you get the best against the best, and teams can build for that. And like all in most sports, you want to build to a particular climax, whether you're an athlete or a swimmer or whatever. So I think it brings in a lot of elements that rugby league can use to its own benefit in a way that the football league system with no playoffs doesn't quite have. And I think also in rugby league, because it's such a physical game, often you get teams can run away with a match due to whatever circumstances, not just because one's at the bottom of the table, one's at the top, but sometimes clubs have an off day. And so the league table doesn't necessarily always point out, indicate which really is the best team, because there may be injuries, there may be other stuff going on or whatever. But the playoff just brings everything to a head. It brings it to that.
Well, I think that's the thing about football, though, that for promotion from the divisions other than the Premiership, they've introduced the playoff. And the number of times a team that didn't finish third has got promoted, nobody's ever said they don't deserve to get promoted. So why do we beat ourselves up about it? To me, the most important game of the season should be that last 80 minutes under lights at Old Trafford. For the women, standalone event, maybe under lights. I think it should be a neutral venue. I don't know what you think about that. Clearly, having two young
every season, yeah.
But have a neutral venue whereby even if it was Featherstone, which has all the facilities that you would want, but you know that you're going to an occasion, an event, and the season ends when that hooter goes. And at that point, you crown a champion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think people that don't like that forget that, was it the last year before we had the grand final, 97, Bradford had run away with the league. That was when Bullmania was at its height. And they'd won the title 6 rounds or 4 rounds before the season ended, and there was literally no interest in those finals. In fact, I think they dropped a couple of those games because they were still drunk from having won it. But you don't, as a sport, you want the climactic minute of the season to be when the hooter goes in the last game.
And I think that's the point, because sport is, whether you're playing or watching, a lot of it is about emotion. You've got so much invested in winning, whether you're on the pitch or you're supporting a team, and nothing brings all that sort of emotional investment that you've made. Even for neutrals who go on, most people go on to the grand final wanting to win, even if they're not supporters of it. And a grand final just brings together all that emotion, all that emotional investment that you've made into this fantastic drama. And it's the grand finals and cup finals, they are the embodiment of the phrase. I think sport is living drama.
And the other thing about
unscripted drama,
which clearly again these two should talk about rather than people who've never had the opportunity through skill and dedication to even get anywhere near a pitch, is the fact that we need events. And we talk about we need people to buy tickets irrespective of who's going to be there. The grand final attendance was talked about quite a lot this year, and there were economic factors as to why it was just over 60,000. But clearly there wasn't a lot of neutral buy-in when you walked around the stadium. It was mainly fans of Leeds and St Helens. Clearly not the two most liked clubs if you're fans of Wigan or Warrington or Castleford or Wakefield. But what you want to do is say, no matter who's there, I need to be there that last night when it's a celebration of the sport. And I don't really care who plays. And if my team gets there, that's great. But even if they don't, it's going to be such a great night for the sport. I want to be part of it. You can't do that with a first past the post system. You can't build an event because you don't know if your team's going to run away with it.
Just mentioned passion and excitement and all that kind of stuff. Was it a bit disappointing that York didn't lift the League Leaders' Shield having won it against Leeds? I know there's the ridiculous fact that there was another game being played which could have affected things, but it didn't, obviously, because York won.
I'm sure Saints kicked off after we'd won.
Yeah.
So
it didn't matter.
No sense.
I think they played the first half, but as soon as you'd won, it didn't matter anyway.
Yeah, it was a bit random, and then it was a bit neither here nor there, because we lifted it in front of Leeds and Saints, so with them warming up behind us, so it was a bit of like, if we'd have lifted it the week before, it'd probably been better. Were it at Headingley? Yeah, it'd probably been better at Headingley than it was at, I can't remember where we lifted it now.
Headingley.
Headingley, they were both at Headingley, weren't they? So, yeah.
I mean, the people at home watching will realise there's a big gap, there's an empty seat, and then there's because of course I tipped Leeds and Saints to dominate the Women's Super League this year.
Just trying to keep you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if Kelsey's forgiven me yet. But did you like my tweet saying you weren't?
I did.
Was it motivation? Did you pin it up on the dressing room wall? Richard Shawright says.
I mean, why
I think one of us screenshot it, put it in the chat, and put, we're going to have to retweet this and a photo of us with the League Leaders Shield when we win.
I mean, it's flattering to have had such an influence on the 2022 Women's Super League season. I feel very proud now, because obviously you, as a player, was dreadful. So at least I've had a little impact. So I'm pleased with that. I mean, and if you can send a medal, happily put it up on the wall.
It's not you. It's not only you that gets screenshot and put in our group chat. We have quite a few fans. We get called York City Tigers is the favourite.
Well, yeah, you're Castleford, aren't you? That's the thing. Nearly the same colours, so it doesn't. Because that's the because there are. I mean, this is the bizarre thing, isn't it? Women's rugby league is still growing, yet you've got your own trolls. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I know. It's actually quite funny.
You're doing something special.
And a lot of them don't even understand. They're like, half of them are like saying stuff, and I'm like, I wish you actually understood because you haven't got a clue. You clearly have not watched a lot of women's rugby league because you don't know a thing.
If you talk about me again,
I know what you were going to say there, but just be very careful.
Did you enjoy the women's awards? Because
Yeah.
because I snuck into those, and Ralph didn't say anything bad, which we'll come to in a minute. But lavish ceremony at Old Trafford. The pie looked lovely. I had to zoom off and pretend to do some work in the media room, but it looked like it was a decent event.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was a bit random. It was before. I think a lot of us girls were a bit like, well, why wasn't it done? They wanted it to be a separate event, which it was, but it was before the men's grand final, yeah. So it really wasn't a separate event because it was like 30 minutes before the grand final kicked off. So it's like, if you're going to say you want to do a separate event, then make it a separate event. Don't just, like, I think probably all of us are, like, it was great to be invited to the grand final in that way, and I've got such great seats, but on the other hand, if it had actually been a separate event, it had been better, but we'd rather have just gone to actually the main night awards and been there for that.
My wife told me off because the first question I asked Tara after lifting the trophy was, it looks like it'll be a nightmare to keep clean. She thought I'd ask the sexiest question there, but I didn't mean it that way. But it does look like an absolute nightmare.
Fingerprints all over it.
It was great though because because the awards were randomly somewhere in Old Trafford, fans were coming in at the end and then just taking the trophies off off Tara and Holly and Lois and having the photos taken with them. It was a random thing out in the, I can't even say foyer at Old Trafford. It was just kind of near the stand. It
was a good afternoon, but it was very random.
It would have looked better had, who's the Man of Steel this year? Brodie Croft. I've voted for him in the Rugby League Writers Awards. If the Man of Steel and the Woman of Steel had been pictured together, it would look better. But Phil, Ralph Rimmer, I think we're going to have a break after this.
Isn't here.
He's not here, is he? We don't know the intent of what he said the other week, but I come from the experience of being in broadcasting randomly now for 20 years. You're always second-guessing what you're about to say next, like asking, is it hard to keep clean or York are rubbish, Leeds and Saints are going to dominate everything, that kind of thing. Paraphrasing myself. But there's a time and a place, probably on WhatsApp groups, but not in public.
Yeah, I mean, clearly for those that have been living in a cave, he made a very injudicious remark at the Championship Awards about have any Fiji players yet been arrested because they were the first nation to arrive for the World Cup. And I suspect it wasn't meant in any other way than there is a propensity for players occasionally within the sport to misbehave.
You're bad ones, you two.
But when you say it in the context of you've been involved in arranging and organising this World Cup and the first guest nation have arrived, it's almost unconscionable. I sort of can understand that there wasn't a malicious intent behind what he was saying, and he wasn't necessarily even directing his remark to the Fijians. It would have been a remark he may have said had it even been the England team. But you just don't say it. There is a time and a place. You certainly don't say it when you're the chief executive of the Rugby Football League. You certainly don't say it when you're being filmed as part of an awards ceremony. And it does raise a question for the organiser of the World Cup. Will it take the shine off what they're trying to achieve? And clearly we'll talk about what we think will be the impact of the World Cup in the second half. And I think it could be massive. But what you don't want is, as the camera pans round at Newcastle a week on Saturday, and Ralph may be sat there next to the other people who've been involved in arranging and organising, what everybody is saying is an inclusive World Cup, that he makes a remark that detracts from that, and the camera focuses on him, and somebody has to say, Ralph Rimmer's sitting there, who made a comment about the Fijians that didn't go down very well. I think it's also interesting that it wasn't reported from inside the room at the time. It could have been, because there were a number of journalists there. It was reported by a football journalist, one who has written some very interesting pieces about Wakefield and what they may or may not have done about their stadium and the running of that club, which is interesting. How did he get the story? Why did he feel it was right to publish it? All that kind of thing. But once it's out there and in the public domain, it ain't going to go away. And I can understand, from speaking to him a little bit off the record, some of the work that Ralph has done to keep the sport going post-COVID, the relationships that he's built with government, his genuine passion for the sport and him wanting the World Cup to be everything that we hope it could be. But you just can't say that.
No, so we're going to stop the thing. I'm going to go say some bad words, and then we'll come back with the second half in a few moments' time.
Is anybody watching?
There were. I mean, I've got to send them a new link now. So this is the thing. It looks like I'm being ignorant and I'm not paying attention to what I've moved up one so you can see me, because my wife has complained you can't see me. Just so it makes you know
We've sent out a search party for Mr.
No one knows where I am. Huddersfield's women, if they want to improve, we've had a chat off air, so I'm finishing a conversation that we've had, which was very interesting, about keeping Magic Weekend and stuff. But if Huddersfield women want to improve, maybe the best thing for them is not have their best signing be taken away by one of the other top teams in Super League. But don't want to say anything controversial.
I think you just did.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, no, I meant Saints.
Oh, Saints. Oh,
yeah. When Shona Hoyle went there for and played about a game, and then
yeah. I mean, one player doesn't win everything.
Well, no.
But that's another reason why the women's game needs to be professionalised, because then you can get those contracts and it's watertight, and you don't have that poaching of players and all the flux that can go on.
So we won't mention French players coming in.
They actually lived at my house for 4 weeks, so...
Did you enjoy the experience?
Yeah, it was good, actually. Very cultural. I learnt some French. Bonjour.
Oh, in fairness, that's... Oui. No. The French, of course, are how serendipitous, because without them, Professor Tony, there probably will not be a World Cup.
Well, they were the people who came up with the original idea for a World Cup in 1934, originally, because the thing to remember is that the Football World Cup only began in 1930, and that was the first one, and the French played a big role in the Football World Cup anyway, but within 6 or 7 months of the game being established in France, they were already suggesting there should be a World Cup. And there was an attempt to have one in 1937 when the Kangaroos came over, but it never worked out. And then it was the French who again took the initiative in 1947 and proposed having one, and then hosted the first one. So yeah, without the French, would have been waiting for a long time for a World Cup. And you know, the French have always been the most expansionist nation in terms of trying to get the game established in other countries. Like Yugoslavia, when the game was played in Yugoslavia in the 1950s. It was all down to the French. So yeah, the French are the true expansionists in rugby league.
I know the international game is... What would be the fair word to use, Phil? I don't want to say a mess, because I know there's lots of people, especially in Australia. I know lots of people work very hard, especially at the smaller nations, to get things going and keep things going. We had the Middle East and African Championships at the weekend, won by Nigeria. So there's lots of people doing lots of good things around the world of rugby league, probably not backed up by those at the top end, perhaps. How many games has Sean Wayne coached against actual real nations so far?
A handful.
It's not his fault. Don't want to blame him for anything. But how important has the World Cup been, and can it be going forward after this tournament?
It's massive. I think if you are serious about promoting yourself on the widest possible stage and attracting new fans, international dimension to your competition is everything. And again, I'd use the Women's Euros, which I think is going to be a motivational factor for England's women going into this World Cup. that it started off with a big event at Old Trafford, and the ticket sales for those games afterwards weren't particularly high, but you got imbued with the spirit of, I need to watch this, I need to, even if it's Holland against Switzerland, something's going on that I want to be a part of, and I think it took on a life of its own, and only international sport can do that. And that's why I think the opportunities post-World Cup are enormous. I think if we're realistic, and people better than me can talk about the chances of the respective teams, but I think if we're honest, only one of the 3 England teams has a chance of winning a tournament. But the actual fact that this is going to be the biggest sporting event going on in this country for 5 weeks is massive for Rugby League. The opening game is going to be an event on 2 fronts. One is St James's Park is going to look great because no matter what the ticket sales are at the moment, there is going to be close on 50,000 people there. And obviously now that the Kaiser Chiefs are playing, that's guaranteed a sellout. I think the fact that it's England and Samoa, where again you've got a game where there's a huge narrative around it, that you want England as the host nation to be taking all the focus, but this Samoan team is now a far more difficult prospect than it would have been when the draw was made at Buckingham Palace, and you're looking at
Prince Harry was he still a member of the royal family? Or he was just leaving, wasn't he?
Well, Rugby League was very nearly establishment then, but like we no longer are. But I think, again, that Samoan team, when people see, 8 players who've just played in the NRL Grand Final, and you're going, I want to see that. That's going to be a really competitive game. I think that gives the tournament a huge kickstart. We shouldn't get too fixated about the result either. It'd be great if England won, but they will get out of the group, and it'll determine who they play in the quarter-finals. Might be a tougher route if they don't win, but it's not a be-all and end-all 80 minutes. It's more a celebration. That night then goes straight into Australia playing Fiji at Headingley, which again, we haven't seen the Australians for far too long over here. You look at their team with 13 debutants in, and we're already salivating, going, we haven't seen these players. Last time we saw them, it was, Cameron Smith and Cooper Cronk and Billy Slater, and they've all gone, so let's see who's going to replace them. And they're playing Fiji, who they've played in the last 3 semi-finals in the World Cup. That one day alone is so enticing, I think, for the sport, and it's on BBC One. And I don't think we should underestimate how many of the games are on free-to-air television, like all of them, but on the main channels. So the women's game is going to be partly on BBC One, partly on BBC Two, wheelchair partly on BBC Two, partly on BBC Three in the red button. I just think it's so important for the sport that this World Cup is a success, and that we then go into another one in 2025. We now know that's happening in France, and I think there's a lot of logic between what happens here will transfer into the logistics of how that French tournament looks. We need to announce 2029 sooner rather than later. I don't know if the professor's got any inside track on when that kind of decision might be made. He moves in those circles, I don't. Sure. But again, I think we need to pin everything around a World Cup, and you look at other sports and their international competitions, and it is how we are going to get traction. It's not going to be how many rounds of domestic competition we play.
So there's extra incentive to go play in 2025, Tamzin, because you'll be able to speak the language over there.
And somewhere to stay.
Yeah.
One of the great things about this current World Cup coming up, Tony Hannan's turned up.
Hey.
Come sit down. Let me move up.
Here for the second half.
You say.
You've got a lot of making up to do. You're answering every question.
Yeah.
I'm Elliot.
It was Catterick, North Yorkshire.
All right. Well, I've just been around Catterick Village, which is very nice.
Did you see the Gurkha restaurant?
No, I didn't.
I've never seen a Gurkha restaurant before.
What do they taste like?
It's the next chief executive of the Rugby Football League, Phil Kaplan. So I did that one out. No. So I was about to say, the most exciting thing about this World Cup build-up, to me, has been the fact that there is an argument over who should be in the England women's squad. Because, well, I mean, you don't have to answer it, but it must be good that there is an actual spotlight on who is in and who is not in the squad, because I can't understand why Sinead Peach is not in, but I know nothing as we discussed.
No, have to agree. I don't know why Sinead's not. She's been at the forefront of... She's been one of our best players all year long, and I think other players have been brought in this year, like within this season, and been put into that World Cup squad. She could have been brought in at the start of the season and been in that, and should be in that World Cup squad. I like Sinead's one of my best friends, and I think she deserves it, and the amount of hard work she puts in on and off the field is second to none.
I don't think that's a controversial opinion, so I think you're all right with that. It's good that we are discussing who should be in and who should be not, and it's a sign of where women's rugby league has come, because I guess we would have had this discussion 5 years ago.
No, we wouldn't, no. But I think, obviously, Craig, the head coach, will make his decisions based on who he thinks will go out there and perform the best. So, although we all have opinions on who we think should be in and out of that squad, he obviously has the best idea. Brazil.
Did you ever think England would be playing a match against Brazil in the Rugby League World Cup?
Did anyone?
It's a ridiculous fixture, and this is where the coach is going to earn his corn, because what do we know about them? Absolutely nothing.
But then a lot of the women's teams, obviously the girls have played France quite a few times in the past few years. Australia, obviously, there's a lot of the NRLW online that you can look at. But a lot of the other teams, like obviously, I actually played in both of the PNG games back in 2017. But a lot of the other teams, there's not a lot of clue about any of them, really, apart from obviously a few of them played in the last World Cup, which was quite a while ago now, so there's not much to go on.
What was that experience like in Papua New Guinea?
Oh, it was crazy. We came off the plane and there's like people like barged up against this like fence, and I was like, oh my god. And we got on this bus and I was like, oh yeah, sit down, bullet shot just in the middle of the windscreen. But it was a great experience. They love rugby league out there. There was like 7,000 people watching this game that we played in Goroka, I think it was called, and they were all just literally piled up against this fence. I'm surprised the fence didn't actually fall down, like with the amount of people that they wanted your socks, they wanted your t-shirts. We were even just like walking down the street and we had like a ball, like a football, and they wanted the ball off us. And we were like, grabbing at your t-shirt. Can I have your t-shirt? I can't take the t-shirt off, unfortunately.
See, there are all these socks on the Papua New Guinean version of eBay now with Sam Burgess' shirt.
The funniest thing was, none of them had shoes, but they all had phones.
Really?
Yeah. We're like, can I take a photo of you? Do you want my shoes while you're at it?
Phones are far more important.
Yeah, in this day and age, I think they are.
The thing that always amuses me is international coaches, or any coaches, Stevie, they will say, I pick on form. And I'm going to pick on you now because, and it's not your fault, you were in a number of England squads when you were out injured, which seems completely a bizarre thing to happen. What was it like being picked when you know you had no chance of playing?
You just know you can do a job. You just know you can compete, and you've got the mentality to compete, and that you can raise to that level. I think that at Leeds, you know, we had players that had thrown themselves into tackles time and time again. You know, Brett Delaney, Jamie Jones, Buchanan, Carl Ablett, myself, you know. And when you get to those playoffs, it doesn't matter who's in form or not. It's like, oh no, you know the level, you know the level to play. So, you know, it's not fully indicative of that. You know, form does come into it, but. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if trust is a big thing as well. You know, Sean Wayne will trust a lot of those players and understand that they can show up and turn up for him, and they're tough enough to do it. You know, if it blends in with his style of play and the type of sort of game he wants to play. So yeah, form, as we know, form can change as well. You know, it can be good before coming into a final and a playoffs or a World Cup, but it can be crap when it starts. Do you know? So it's where do you deal your hand and what do you rely on? I guess, You know, there's the England football that are doing not so great at the minute, but you know, there's many times where as an international team they've done really poorly and then performed well, but then they've also done really well as a team and done poorly. You know, so it's like it's hard, isn't it? It's hard.
I think a lot of it is based on experience as well. A lot of players who are probably on form, especially younger players, obviously, especially in the women's game, a lot of the players, like you have here, obviously Amy's, Jodie, Rudgie, Tara, are all at that topper end for who have been playing for a while. They have a lot of experience, and although some people like may have opinions on how on form those individuals have been, like Amy, etc., have been on very good form this year, but some may say others haven't, but they have experience in those situations. And putting a player who has been on form in the Super League all year, then putting them in camp for 3 weeks, without the family around them, without the support network that they usually have, to then put them on an international stage, they then might not actually perform as well as they have been doing all year. So I think coaches have to actually look at experience, how people are going to actually perform in camp as well, because that's a big thing. Like, you're spending like a lot of time with these people, and the group of people also have to get on. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Plenty of historical cases of squads not getting on at international level. There's
mainly when half of them were from Leeds and half were from something.
as JJ being told us the other week. There's, I think the case I can think of in sport comes in football, with Jimmy Greaves missing out on the World Cup final in 1966 and how that affected him, because of course he wanted his teammates to win, he wanted England to win, but he wasn't part of that. When you are part of a team and you're on the sidelines for big games, Stevie, how does that feel? Obviously you want the team to win, but how do you feel in yourself at that point?
I mean, I feel all over the place because I'm not involved in this World Cup. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm having to find another relationship back to the game because I've retired, I've been injured, and I've had headaches every day, and partly because of the game, you know. So I'm having to, you know, these conversations are great for me because it gives me another touch point back to the game, back to the World Cup. But yeah, when you're not playing, it's a mixture. I had that episode in 2015 in League Leaders game where I was sat on a physio bed looking at my knee that looked like an inflatable knee, and I think we're drawing against Huddersfield, and that means we're going to finish 4th or 5th or wherever, which meant we weren't going to do the treble because we weren't going to get the second trophy. It meant we were going to get a much worse bonus.
That's the most important thing.
I can imagine that.
That's another thing.
Imagine a bonus for a second.
I can put up with the pain as long as I get the bonus.
Yeah. But then I'm thinking, what the hell what is this now? I'm like, what have I done here now? And I'm not going to be a part of this treble, you know, the last game, you know, we're talking the last game, which means everything. So you go into that and you've got so many emotions. You got emotions. I had emotions as a Leeds Rhinos fan, Leeds Rhinos supporter, growing up all that time. A Leeds Rhinos young sort of player, where I'm watching all these legends of the game that I played with and teammates with now, but they're finishing off their sort of last ever game, and but then you're also not a part of it, and you feel your self-esteem's lower because you're not doing it. You know, you literally just don't feel as good about yourself, and you can walk around the stadium and cheer it, but have you done it? I don't know. Have you done it really? It's like, so it's a mixture. You know, I don't feel one thing. I feel many different things. I think that's, you know, I guess that's the lot of life.
Can I just ask something? Do you get support for that?
No, you don't. There's a short answer. I know there's a welfare manager now, and which, to be fair, you know, Nigel Johnson at Leeds, it's revolutionised, you know, alongside our culture that's more open, speaking about mental health and the ups and downs and self-esteem and what's winning, what's losing. You know, we have a conversation around it, so we're a lot more open, and there's more support there. But back then, it was like, you know, it's just like do your best. You know, it's just And I guess that's why we need people speaking about the other sides of it, you know, and understanding those parts of it as well.
Because the first thing I should have asked you when we started, whenever we turned up here, was how are you? I mean, you obviously had to retire because of the effects of concussions, which is a big talking point in all sports these days.
Yeah.
How are you at the minute?
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm all right. Like, you know, that's what you're saying it up here. I'm all right. Yeah, I'm all right. But yeah, I'm good. Some days I'm shocking. Some days I'm really good and I'm positive. You know, and then with the concussion, you know, I'm trying to go in between feeling the headaches and disregarding the headaches. You know, it's like it's just a bit of a balancing act with that, and then the dizziness and stuff, and just dealing with stuff that I can't do that I used to do a lot of the time, and then obviously, you know, just doing, you know, what we love doing, what we've watched, and being a part of a team and testing yourself to the limit, which I probably did too much, but it's part of who I am, you know. So it's like so that's, you know, why these conversations are great. And you know, I'm hopefully next week going to be doing a roundtable talking about concussion, which I hope that will be an open conversation between players where we can say what we think, you know, and what we feel, and why it's such a complex matter at the minute.
It's strange because it almost sounds, I mean, this will sound stupid, but that's almost the hardest question to ask someone. Because I don't know if you want to answer that question. I can ask you, what's it like winning the grand final? What's it like doing this? Because that's easy for me to ask, because, you know, it's all positive thoughts and all in my mind. It's positive winning something. But asking someone how they are, who's retired because of the effects of what they've done on the field, it's... Yeah. Well, do I want to answer this? Do I want to know the answer?
Yeah, but I think it's good to ask that, because I think in life and society now everything's so absolute. You know, when you say, how do you feel winning grand final? After the game, I was so anxious. I didn't know what to do. I was so anxious. I was just like, I was so high. I didn't know where to go. I was so high. I didn't know when I was going to come down and what that was going to look like. So, but then there was a flavour of euphoria. So it's like, I think if you know, asking the questions is better than not asking them, because we just get presented something that's not the truth. Do you know what I mean? And you can get lost in an illusion that winning a World Cup or a grand final is going to make everything absolutely amazing for the rest of your life.
Because now there's no ignorance over head injuries and whatever. Tamzin, do you ever worry going out in the field what potential damage you can do to yourself?
Yeah, I think obviously everyone, when you're out there, you don't think about getting your head knocked until obviously it actually happens and you're like, oh, but you don't think about it a lot. I don't think I particularly think about it a lot, but obviously with things being more like research now, obviously it is a bit scary to think that stuff like that can happen like in the future, or it could like end your career. But I don't think I think people just love it so much that they don't. And I probably think that you wouldn't take back everything that you did to.
No, I mean,
and that's
just
someone who,
I think mine's it's a rarer case. Do you know what I mean? It's like I speak to people. Obviously, I have different conversations with people because I'm like a big flipping, you know, alarm bell for people. But people who have experienced stuff similar will talk to me, and I have a different picture. But yeah, you know, there is a balance to find in amongst everything, and you know, weighing up the positives and negatives and stuff. But yeah, it's complex. But for a long time, I look back now and I sort of think about the experience that I've had with my head and how I felt and stuff, and I'm like, oh, was that feeling like that after that 50 tackle game that I did? Was that a concussion, or was that, do you know? And you sort of have those, you know, memories and stuff that comes up, but you know, it's taken a big sort of injury to put me out. Because
now we've got this World Cup coming up, we've just had players miss grand finals, big semi-finals through head injuries. There's the big case in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins playing the other week. Someone might miss this World Cup final because of a head injury, and I don't know, it's going to be a difficult decision that's going to be made, but it has to be made.
Yes, I think we sort of come on in leaps and bounds actually as a game. I think you'd agree, Stevie. When you look back to certainly when I was growing up, and I think us too as well, and not so much you're a bit younger. Back in
Just doesn't look it, but yeah.
back in the 70s, you sort of taught whatever sport you were playing never to show pain or that you were hurt. Play cricket, for example, if the ball hit you, the very last thing you should be doing is letting the baller know that you were in a bit of trouble there. And probably it's still the same on the field. If you're getting hurt, you can't let the opposition see that. But I think that aspect of when you come off the field and get back into the dressing rooms, things have changed. I mean, I had the real luxury of spending a year with Batley in 2016, where I just went everywhere with them to write a book about that club and the town itself. So I got a real first-hand view of what it's like behind the scenes for the likes of these two. You know, when you're going back in the dressing room at half-time, I was there with them, and the coach is into you, and everybody's got their own little rituals and everything. And the most noticeable thing is that everybody's in their own little world, and you're not really going to get through into that. You know, everybody seems to be in their own headspace. But it is quite an awesome thing when you watch professional and semi-professional sports people, and they have to sort of come out of that and then get back on the field. It's an unnatural thing in a way. I mean, they are gladiators, that's what they are. So all the psychological stuff that goes along with that, it's not straightforward. It's tough because it is a tough sport, isn't it? Probably no tougher. Maybe boxing might be on a par, but very, very little else.
Book's still available.
Book's still available.
We should have brought one, shouldn't we? And put it on the table there.
I'm only 5 minutes before you
Yeah,
mentioned it.
you know, the call on someone missing a World Cup final, that's a big call, isn't it?
Because obviously,
Who wants to make that call?
Well, it's interesting.
But it should be part. I mean, I think that's the thing. But there won't be the same dilemma over just a routine, if there is such a thing, league match. And I think that's the point about the governing body has to impose the standards, and they are imposed whatever the circumstances, because it's rugby league, and if people can find a way around the rules, they're going to find a way around the rules, aren't they? Because that's how we were born, really, when trying to get around amateur rules in rugby union.
But also nobody wants to lose the place in the side. Nobody wants to let the teammates down.
Yeah.
There's all that sort of thing.
So it has to be an independent decision, regardless of the level of the match. Otherwise, the whole thing will fall apart.
Although, interestingly, there are two different protocols. You know, over here, if you have a concussion, it's an 11-day stand down, you miss the next game.
Is that?
The NRL, it isn't. You can play a week later, depending if you pass some pretty stringent tests.
Will everyone be on the same protocol?
Yes.
11?
Yeah, the IRL have their own protocols for the World Cup, but it's interesting that is something that post-World Cup we may be looking to standardise.
And most sports are moving to rugby union's just followed rugby league's ruling, and it's moved to the 11-day stand down. Because obviously, if it's just a 6-day stand down, which it used to be, it means you can play the next match. So, where's the protection there?
Well, I remember, let me lob another grenade in at Tamzin, because in Australia they play 70 minutes. If I come up to any female rugby league player in England and say, right, I think you need to play less minutes because we need to change the game, I'd be trolled even more than I was before. Is that going to be an advantage at all for England in this World Cup? The fact that they're used to playing 70 minutes in the NRL, to me.
Yeah, I think so, because that's an extra 10 minutes of extra fitness. Like, obviously the Aussies are very athletic. Like,
I mean, we need everyone.
I'm not taking that away from them, but like an extra 10 minutes of playing rugby league is pretty tough. No matter how fit you are, it's a different type of fitness. Is match fitness.
That's when
you can train. Yeah, you can train all you like, but nothing actually trains you for that when you're out there. So I think it probably will give an advantage, but not a marginal one.
It's not an easy game, is it, really? Do you know, when you think about what you're actually doing on the field, it's not an easy... I remember saying to Kevin Sinfield, and I think I was like 19, 2014, I said, this is just a massive flogging, this, isn't it? Before a game. And he went, yeah, it is actually, isn't it? Just like, you just fear, those training sessions, you fear. You're like, you're just like fearing it to death, like going outside and running
the
so
deep
much.
depths of winter when it's raining.
It's just like you're running 10 metres back, sprinting 10 metres back, 20
If you
metres
don't do
back.
it fast enough, you have to do more.
Down on your front, up. And I'm like thinking, it's a game now. That's what we're doing in a game though. But that's the, stuff that's put on top of each other, and because of the competition, it makes it what it is, the hard flipping test that it is.
The 50-30 gig in Australia as well.
Yeah.
Make up their own rules.
And I swear, don't they play with a smaller ball as well?
Yeah.
Also, we got
Yeah.
loads of advantages.
Size
now.
four
This is
ball.
great.
A size 4 ball, yeah.
So they won't be used to the size of the ball. We need to
It'll be
make sure-
raining. We're not used to that.
Make sure the kicks on 50-30.
It'll
so
be
get the
raining,
ball.
that's the biggest one.
Oh, well, now I'm turning my mind. England's going to win the Women's World Cup now. We've all got the old advantages for us. This is going to be the biggest Women's World Cup ever, Tony, and that's a great thing. Isn't it? The TV coverage, the media coverage, the teams coming over. It's the biggest showcase for the women's game there's ever been.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
by a long bit.
Oh, I forget there's two turns.
There's
Sorry.
two turns.
Go on, Tom, you go first, yeah.
Well, I'll say, yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Phil.
Well, I think one of the things, I think we've all been close about this, just to insert a sort of negative historical note, is that this has been a long time coming as well, because in 2000, at the same time as the Men's World Cup in 2000, there was what was called the Women's World Series between Great Britain and Australia and New Zealand. And it sort of set the stage, and there were World Cups, and then there was a break. And it's another example, and you can imagine, if it had been developed as it should have been in the early 2000s, would have now been at an even more advanced stage with the Women's World Cup. And it's kind of, you look back in the history of the women's, and it's the same with the domestic game as well. It's the women's game in the 2000s is yet another example of rugby league's ability never to miss an opportunity, because if it ever had carried on the way, that initial burst of enthusiasm and organisation 20 odd years ago, then Tamzin could have been a household name by now. But we are rugby league, and we need to be aware of the fact that when an opportunity comes along, you've got to grab it and develop it and run with it.
The interesting thing is that the NRLW Grand Final, which was a precursor to the men's, had over 40,000 people watching it. They got there early because they wanted to see the Women's Grand Final. We already know that there is a record crowd for a Northern Hemisphere game going to the opening doubleheader at Headingley on the 1st of November. There's over 10,000 tickets have been sold. If you can't build on that, purely from a commercial point of view, never mind a playing point of view, then you're clearly not doing your job properly. And the fact that doubleheader at Headingley starts in an afternoon is really interesting, because not everybody will be off work in an afternoon. It does give you the opportunity to do loads of offers to schools, which I think there's been a high take-up of. It's England against Brazil, which, with the greatest will in the world, shouldn't be competitive. I don't think that detracts from the occasion. The fact of seeing a nation like Brazil, a continent like South America, running out in a World Cup is huge for rugby league. Never happened before. Similar with Jamaica in the men's. But you also get then PNG against the Canadian Ravens afterwards. So we're talking about events, occasions, and how you... goes back to the IMG discussion in the first half about what does the sport need. Well, you've got all the elements of traditional rugby league, but you've also got something that if you weren't perhaps an avid fan, you might say, I'll invest in that afternoon, because if 10,000 other people are going, and there's going to be those Brazilian colours playing in a World Cup that mean so much in another sporting sense, I want to be there and see it. So we would be foolish in this sense not to build on that opportunity.
And not too far down the road in York, where we will be on the afternoon of the game, Australia-New Zealand, which that's going to be a great game on York's doorstep, and a great opportunity again to sell the game to future York City Knights ladies players, potentially, not just fans.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
A potential World Cup final as well. I mean, hopefully it's not. But
We'll see.
I'm going to talk about the Wheelchair World Cup as well, because England and France are the joint favourites. Phil, England, London.
Yeah. Having seen the intensity of the wheelchair grand final at first hand on Saturday, and realising that a bulk of the players that were on that pitch will be now amalgamating and playing for England, yes, and I think there's two things about wheelchair. One is you really should experience it live, For all those who've watched it on television, it's a great experience. It fits the camera perfectly in the same sort of way that snooker does. But unless you're there and you can feel the vibrations of the hits and you can hear metal on metal and you can see people getting thrown out of their chairs and play carrying on, everybody who plays it has a story. And one of the things IMG were talking about was building narratives. It's already there. These are superstars in the making that not enough people know about. But if you look at the work that England have done since the last World Cup final, which they still feel aggrieved about, they probably won't say it publicly, but they felt they were robbed in Perpignan in 2017. You can watch it on YouTube, make up your own mind, but there was a feeling that there may have been some home officials that perhaps didn't allow some things to happen at the end of the game that possibly meant England were denied the opportunity. It rankles with some of those that will still be playing. But you can see the progression over the last couple of test series we've had, that we've beaten France, we've put some doubt in their mind. Clearly they have some exceptional players. Most of them will come from one club who've dominated over there. We now have players from 4 or 5 clubs who are going to make a contribution and have been together a long time. Yes, we'll beat them in the final at Manchester.
And Tom Coyne's sorting his hair out as well. And I know people who are here will see disgraceful hair, but he's looking better. He looked really statesmanlike on the telly. Wore a suit with the badge on. Tony, what are you looking forward to the most about the Rugby League World Cup coming up in this country as part of the Rugby League World Cup Cultural Festival?
Well, the opening night in Newcastle, I think it's going to be pretty special. I've got a bit of a background in that as well, sort of being very keen back in the days when Gateshead Thunder first kicked off up in the northeast. People like Mick Hogan getting the academy side of things going and bringing it through from the youth rugby and everything. It's really good to see how far it's come up there now, Rugby League, and it's just growing and growing all the time with like clubs in Peterlee and places like that. So I think it's a real sort of reward to the northeast really, to have an event of that magnitude there, and it's really important that it does kick off well. And you've sort of got a few doubts about the actual. Maybe can England win that game? Well, they should win that game, but then again, you look at the Samoa team, and maybe they shouldn't necessarily. So there is jeopardy in it, but the best games have got jeopardy in them, and when you win them, they're all that more satisfying. So it's got real potential, that match, to kick it all off with a massive bang, and then, as we've seen in previous World Cups, things tend to roll on from that.
It's going to be a fascinating night in Newcastle.
I think if you're talking about more generally, what are we looking forward to the most? I think it goes beyond players. Clearly there are some that we definitely want to see. I want to see Jerome Luai close up, because we've watched him for the last 2 or 3 years and he's a character. But what I love more than anything is the idea that we are genuinely spreading the sport with this World Cup, that we are seeing a team from Brazil, we are seeing a team from Jamaica, we are seeing again a team from Lebanon, which when you think about how they could even get a team together and have a sport, it may not prosper, but it's got sufficient foundations there to be something. When you look at, even in the wheelchair, we're going to see the debut of the USA. Now the USA could be anything in sport, but again, if the USA latches on to one of its teams is in a World Cup and might do something, I'm looking. I don't think they're one of the few teams that haven't announced their squad yet, but the word coming back from there is they're going to have a lot of veterans in their team. So again, if you're linking to that military background, they may not have the nuances of how the game is played, but what there will be is they'll be fit and they'll be competitive. And the fact that the first wheelchair game is England against Australia, and there isn't really an Ashes history, but the people that go to the Copper Box, and again, they're talking about record attendance for a wheelchair game, for that, will be able to get into that Ashes spirit. I just think it's all those stories that excite more than individuals playing for nations, and that's why I think we do have a huge opportunity.
Tamzin, what are you looking forward to?
All of it.
which is the perfect answer.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything in particular. I think it's going to be a great spectacle. Every game is probably going to be interesting, and that's a good thing about it, and there's lots of things to look forward to.
We've got Brazil, we've got Spain in the wheelchair as well, haven't we? There's a spread of nations who are not
nearly
traditional.
Had Norway.
Nearly had Norway, yeah. Ireland have had to step into their shoes, unfortunately, but is really exciting. Steve, what are you looking forward to the most?
I don't know. Just as Phil were talking, I think it's about the Samoa game. I think that's going to be a big game. Just to be proud of rugby league, to have that event on and to have such an atmosphere. And I think it's going to be competitive, and hopefully we win. But I don't think that has to be the main factor. I think it's just got to be a good spectacle. I think that's going to be great. And I'm interested to see the messages that come from it. I know Kev's doing that 27 marathons in 27 hours.
Why does he do that? Why
Because he can. Because he can, I think. But I think these messages that can be conveyed through it is something that is going to be exciting to see, and I'm sure that they're behind marketing and behind it, and trying to spread the good work that we do in rugby league, which will be good. And then seeing England in the final would be awesome.
It would.
It'd be awesome.
What do you think? First, Tony, because we're coming towards the end, what are you looking forward to the most about this World Cup?
Well, like Tamzin, all of it. Because I was thinking, I'm old enough to remember when there were just 4 teams. But then when you think, it's only 30 years ago, there were just 5 teams: Papua New Guinea, Britain, Australia, New Zealand and France. So you look at where we've come, and it's just, to be honest, as somebody who's supported the game for a long time, it's just mind-blowing to imagine that there's a women's team from Brazil playing. It's just unthinkable, let alone that Jamaica are playing. And also, I think the fact that this is probably the first World Cup where you can't really 100% say who's going to win. And, imagine what it would do for world sport if Samoa or Tonga won. Or potentially Fiji beat Australia in their opening game, which is not beyond the bounds of possibility. So it's for the first time ever, I think we've got a World Cup where pretty much everything is up for grabs and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, which I think is very different from what's happened in most other games. And I think the final thing, I think the other thing which would be great, is that what it will give rugby league is that in Britain it will give rugby league its step back. There will be a spring in rugby league step, because it's going to be a success. Whether if England perform creditably, then that's going to be great. Whether we can win it or not, that's another matter. But who knows who's going to win? But I think the tournament will be a success in its own terms, and it'll give rugby league exposure that it hasn't had for a long time, and it'll be a lot of people who are rusted on fans who think, I'll go and watch a rugby league game. I want to see it on telly or whatever. And that will give the whole game a sense of confidence. It will restore its sense of pride, which it hasn't had for quite a while, for a whole variety of reasons, stuff that's gone on in the game, economic conditions. But I think it will give rugby league fans just that extra pride in the game that's necessary to propel it forward. Because if you're not so confident about your own game, why should anybody else take an interest? So I think it's going to be great because of what's going to go on the field, but also because of the fillip that's going to give to the game and to individual supporters. They'll be proud to say, I'm a rugby league supporter.
So I turn to the audience and say, any questions?
Well, I think certainly from my point of view, I think the wheelchair ladies or the men's World Cup that is just on our doorstep very soon. I think it's absolutely imperative that the media get behind it. People watch it on the TV, because I think more than anything, it's a sport which is so exciting to watch, whichever version you go and see. We absolutely love it here, and I think the more people that see it on the TV and even go at the games, we need the sport to grow. Now, we mentioned in the first half, which wasn't recorded, about the IMG stuff, but as we purely talk about the World Cup, there's nothing better than a World Cup to get a whole nation behind it, and people thinking, oh my word, rugby league is a fantastic sport. You guys have played it. I've watched you both. Brilliant athletes. Wouldn't want to tackle them. Can I just say that? At all.
You're going to have to get out.
Right or wrong. So, but I think more than anything, it's about getting the nation behind it and getting those new fans, those new supporters, and general interest, because it's the pinnacle of the sport, is the World Cup. So if we can get that right, be it Newcastle for the first game or every single game after that, in whatever part. I think it's really important the whole country gets behind it, and then we'll get the more fans, which is what we all want, more interest, more media exposure, which is sadly lacking. Maybe not for this World Cup, but certainly during the Super League season, you look at the papers and you look if you can find a result. Well, that's just rubbish for the exceptional product that this sport is.
I think there's two other issues as well that make it important. One is the double-header finals at Old Trafford. Because I think other sports will look at that in envy and say, this isn't tokenism. There is a genuine reason to put the women and the men on the same stage. And I think if they see Rugby League doing that first, because we are good at firsts, sometimes we're not good at following up the first that we've done, I think that's going to have a real impact. And to be honest, it'd be fantastic if England are in both of those finals. But if they're not, if you're waiting for Australia against New Zealand in the women's and you're waiting for Tonga against Australia and New Zealand in the men's, that's something that I think will fill a stadium, but also will keep people absolutely glued. The other thing is the cultural element around each of these nations that I don't think we make enough of. But when you have hackers and sippy towels and prayers and anthems, and you see what it means to the players, you know, you can see Fijian players in tears before a game. You can see New Zealanders so passionate about what it means to put on that shirt. That you only get that in an international dimension. We do that particularly well. And a World Cup showcases it all in a 5-week period. I think that's going to capture the nation's imagination as well. And that's why, again, it's about who wins, but it isn't in some respects. It's about what you stand for as a sport, a bit like what Tony was saying, that, you know, it's who we are. And if we can get that out there, and that message comes across, and you want to see some of these people then play domestically when the new season starts, fantastic.
Any more for any more? Silence, good. Right. That was Tony, was well worth you coming.
Well, I'm surprised. Have we already had the first half?
We're playing the 35 minutes each way. We're going on the Australian women.
Are we going to have a third half?
I'll tell you what, he didn't half make a contribution as a substitution in the second half.
Golden points coming up. All your books are in shops now, I'm guessing.
All books, yes, all books.
Wait, you're away.
And in libraries.
Yeah. More than from libraries, you have to pay for them.
That's right, yeah. That's the beauty of libraries, yeah. They should all be, and not just mine, lots of other people's as well.
The Tony Hannan library. But Underdogs, the book about Batley is unbelievable. Unbelievable stuff.
Well,
it is believable because it happened.
Yeah. Well, it's just happened again nearly as well this year. I mean, the number of messages I've been getting by people saying, is there a follow-up? You know, I think that like me to catapult myself in at the start. Can't really do that. But Batley is such a great little club. It's like a microcosm of everything that's great about community rugby league. And you just can't go wrong there. There are just stories all the time. So who knows? Might go back one day.
Greg Lingard's hat. I'm a big fan.
And no shoes.
No. Is he from Garoka? Is he there? The new magazine 4020 is out next week.
Yeah, we're busy doing it at the moment, which is why I was late.
Good answer.
I've got to write something about tonight now. So when you read it and you say, a crowd of 1,000 people turn up.
It's not rugby union. I think we should say before he says it himself that we are publishing El Profesor's next book.
Oh yeah, that's
another one.
Look out for that before Christmas. Put it on your list.
What's it called?
Who Framed William Webb Ellis.
The greatest mystery.
And other puzzles, and other puzzles in rugby history. It's a collection of little short pieces about, you know, why is the ball oval, why the two teams in whole, why there's so many penalties in rugby union, everything you've ever wanted to know about the games. There's a real answer as well. It's not just prejudice. There's a historical answer there. Yeah, so it's out before Christmas.
Well, good luck with that. And is your podcast still? It's podcast as well still going?
It is, but it's going once a month now rather than once a week. So that's Rugby Reloaded. So if you want to get your fill of rugby history. And other football codes as well. I do a bit of soccer, a bit of rugby union. You can find it at Rugby Reloaded.
Stevie, what are you up to?
I'm just talking at the minute. Just going around and talking.
Where did we pick you up from?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. Masters. I'm doing a Masters in Sports Business Management, which, you know, who knows what I'm going to manage after that. Who knows?
The Leeds Rhinos. You could take over from Gary Headington. You can't go on forever.
I don't know. I'm doing that, and I'm doing mentality. Still doing mentality, the corporate wellbeing stuff. Got a counselling service for men on there. You know, men that I hope connect to sport and connect to the worth in doing that. Work on your mental health, and then I'm sort of hoping to get into acting. Actually, it's just a bit of a background ambition. You know, that might happen, it might not, but we'll see.
So you might be popping up the Mark the Wall pack or something.
It might be. I mean, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I'm deciding what I'm doing and feeling into it, I guess, at the minute.
And
Just
the Papua New Guinean's got his socks as well.
Yeah, well, there's a trendy socks he's filled with, like ankle socks.
All sorts of that trendy.
Build some trendy North Leeds. It's the up and coming area.
Yeah, that's
what
true.
the Prime Minister says. Tamzin, you've got nothing to promote. You haven't got a podcast, you haven't got a book, you haven't got... No. Just your season.
She's talking. You can do more of this, you're good at it.
Am I?
Yeah.
We've got a good track record because, you know, I'm only presenting this podcast these days because Mark Wilson's on every TV channel. So, and we don't even talk about Danica Prem or whatever. Like third choice or whatever. Because Phil don't know how to work the laptop. Is your laptop camera working yet, Phil?
Temperamental.
We wish you well though with York next year. You know, I'm going. Do you want me to tip you to win? Because you know this is the problem now.
I want you to say we're going to be bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we talk about rugby league promoting stuff. We've got a flipping room full of whiteboards here.
Oh, we could have just written.
We could have put a new book on.
Yeah,
new book, couldn't we? Talking.
Yeah, but I turned up and just put the laptop up and then
already paying off for sports marketing.
No, that's it. Here we go.
Yeah,
I'm feeling into it now.
Yeah.
The people want
Make
to
sure
go
the whiteboards have got some on.
Right.
You know, that's rule number one in sports marketing.
Next week we're in Doncaster. We don't know who's on the panel. Also next week we're in Newcastle. Are we the warm-up app for the Kaiser Chiefs?
He's on the panel and he might turn up for the whole thing.
Well, that's why saving the best questions for next week. No offence to be honest. Right, as ever, what I do is I press end stream, it ends it, and then we're finished. So thank you for watching. Thank you to our audience mainly. Yeah, go on,